My name's Jack Petranker. Long time ago, more than 30 years ago, I was the dean here at the Institute. But I doubt that there are many people who who were here. I don't recognize anybody who was here at that time. So anyway, as I said, I haven't been at the Institute in quite a long time. I've been involved in other things, other aspects of the Nyingma community, as we like to refer to it, or sometimes we say the Nyingma mandala. And really what ties that mandala together is the founder, Tarthang Tulku, or Tarthang Rinpoche. And I've been a student of his really full-time for more than 40 years. So one of the things about getting older is all the numbers you throw out just seem so remarkable. I mean, it seems like a long time, but it's true. I've been doing this for a very long time. So Rinpoche, came to this country in 1969. This is a little background. We'll be talking about the substance fairly soon. But Rinpoche came to this country actually in 68, came to Berkeley in 69. Institute was founded in 72. And from the very beginning, he did something that's really very unusual for Tibetan Lamas, even today. He started thinking about ways to present what he wanted to communicate to people, not only in traditional ways, although he does that also, but in non-traditional ways. And I'd say the major effort that he made in that direction was through these teachings that we call the time-space knowledge vision. And I'm going to refer to it from now on as TSK. That's how people usually talk about it. He was looking for something that would work for the Western mind and for the Western mindset. Lately, I've been thinking that's a good term. The Western mind is set in a certain way. And how do you communicate with the Western mind? And how do you develop practices for the Western mind? And how do you encourage people to look more deeply into their own experience and their own nature if they happen to be Westerners? It's not exactly the same thing as being raised in the Tibetan tradition, where the traditional teachings are what you naturally get involved with. So he started experimenting. He's been experimenting ever since. And there are a lot of books. He's written a lot of books, and most of them really do not present the traditional teachings, a little bit in passing sometimes. But in terms of the TSK vision, that's not traditional at all. And Rinpoche has been very clear from the beginning that it's not a Buddhist teaching. He says, people might like to think it's Buddhist. If that's what they want to think, it's okay with me, but I don't see it as a Buddhist teaching. So we talk about it as a secular teaching, but I don't really like that term so much because it's not about the values that we usually associate with secularism, which are kind of like, they almost slide into materialism. And TSK is not like that. TSK is really about a new vision of reality. That's the subtitle of the first book. And actually, I think it's a very helpful clue to what Rinpoche was doing with TSK, because it's not exactly a question of changing who you are or developing practices that will sort of catapult you into some new self-version of yourself. It's about seeing reality differently. It's about seeing the world differently. And of course, that involves seeing yourself differently as well. And once the vision is in place, then change comes easily. So in a way, the TSK teaching is about doing things in a very easy way, making things, changing in a way that is just very natural, because you kind of realign. It's a little bit, I suppose, like if you're getting a chiropractic treatment, and there are certain things that are tight and stuck and out of alignment. And so TSK realigns your relationship with reality, and then, of course, particularly then with time and space. So Rinpoche presented those teachings, and they've stayed a kind of underlying theme for everything he's done. He wrote a book in 1977 called Time, Space, Knowledge, and Knowledge, A New Vision of Reality. And then he wrote 5 more books in the TSK series, as we say. And I was the editor for those 5 books, not for the first one, but for all the other 5. So it's become a very, very central part of my practice. Being an editor, Rinpoche dictates his books. So being an editor is a very challenging process. I mean, you're so concerned with really communicating clearly what he has said. And sometimes he would dictate. I remember on one of the books, he would often be dictating to me while I was driving him into San Francisco. And I just trying. So it can be challenging, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And of course, I do the traditional practices to some extent also. But really the heart of my own practice and the heart of what I've been teaching for a long time now is the TSK vision. The thing about the TSK vision, as it shows up in the world, it shows up in these 6 books, right? They're not easy reading. How many of you are familiar with any of the TSK books? Yeah, maybe not quite half in the room and even less online. Well, some people really love them. They really get into them. But a lot of people look at them and they say, this is difficult. I'm not sure I understand what Rinpoche is saying here. I can't quite make sense of it. And that's been an ongoing issue. So there's a very dedicated group of TSK practitioners really all around the world, but it's a small group. If you compare it to what I would say is the significance of the teachings, it's a very small group. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is find ways to make the teachings more accessible. So in the year 2000, I started a nonprofit. So I did it with Rinpoche's blessings, but it was something that I wanted to do called the Center for Creative Inquiry. And the Center for Creative Inquiry has really as its fundamental goal, you could say, to make the insights that the TSK vision transmits more widely available, to find ways to help people connect with those teachings. And I've done that in various ways. And there are other people who teach in the Center for Creative Inquiry and who are involved in it. But I've tried a number of different things. And about 10 years ago, I developed an approach that I call full presence mindfulness. And it's meant to be a way of connecting people, of making the connection with the TSK vision, but doing it in a way that's more accessible. And of course, one of the reasons that that I presented it that way is because at that time, say 10 years ago, there was this tremendous surge of interest in mindfulness. And partly I thought, well, let's piggyback on that, let's use that. People think they would like to know something about mindfulness. So let's build on that. But full presence mindfulness is not exactly mindfulness in the way that it's taught in most places or in most ways. It's got some aspects in common for sure. I mean, it's not deceptive advertising to say this is a kind of mindfulness. It is. But it's full presence mindfulness. And so the question really is, what does it mean to be fully present? And one of the things that it means is becoming attuned to a different way of being in space and time. So a few years ago, I actually did a search in the books for the term mindfulness. And I've said in the past that it only shows up once in the TSK books, but I did the search again the other day. It actually shows up twice. But once is not so interesting. I mean, I didn't feel I learned anything from that. But the other one, the one that I saw originally, which I thought was very interesting and helpful, Rinpoche says mindfulness is an appreciation for space and time. Mindfulness is an appreciation for space and time. And nobody else would define it that way. But that's a very interesting thought. And you know, it's helped me to feel good about coming at TSK in terms of full presence mindfulness. So the thing about full presence mindfulness is it's not mindfulness in the usual sense, and of course I'll be saying more about that very soon. And it doesn't depend on meditation in the usual sense. I'm kind of assuming that everybody here has some familiarity with meditation. Anybody not at all? No, okay. It's not meditation in the usual sense. As I've said, it's really more about a way of seeing. And in particular, a way of seeing that involves a new vision of reality. And so in some ways, that's traditional. In the tradition, in the Tibetan tradition, you talk about a path as consisting of the view, the practice, and the never have a good translation for this. Tagom Chot, this is Tibetan. The view, the practice, like the meditation, cultivating it, and then putting it into action. That's the Chot. And so TSK also is all about starting with the vision. But then there is practice. And one of the aspects that shows up in the TSK books, and certainly in Full Presence Mindfulness, is practice, practices. Rinpoche calls them exercises in the TSK books. Lately, I've been thinking that a nice term is experiments. Like, what if you do it this way? What if you see the world this way? What if you look closely in this place where you haven't usually looked before? Experiments, what happens? That's really, I think, a nice way to think about what happens in TSK, because it's a lot about asking questions, about inquiry. Very, very central to the TSK vision. There isn't so much theory. I mean, you could say Rinpoche presents a lot of ideas. He said to me once, he said, most people write a book and they only have 2 or 3 ideas in the book, but I think I have 2 or 3 ideas on every page. And that's true. So you could say there's theory, but it's not about trying to establish a particular way of that this is the way it is. In fact, one of the problems that TSK approaches, I mean, a problem in our usual way of being in the world, is that we are constantly trying to figure out how things are. We're trying to say, this is the way things are. And in TSK, there isn't really a way things are. Now, what's very interesting is to look at the way we try to set up the way things are, because that then becomes a field of inquiry that just opens and opens and opens. So in shifting the view, in doing these experiments, you come to see time and space differently, and then that opens into a different kind of knowledge. And one of the key things I would say about TSK is that when you view time and space differently, your understanding of yourself changes. And we all have a basic understanding of time and space. And a lot of times we don't think about what our understanding is, or we take it for granted because generally in our society, people share an understanding. I'm not talking about science, about the way that science tends to view time and space. I mean, that may be helpful and may not, but it's not the way we usually think about things. What we're interested in is the way we usually think about things and the way we usually think about time and space. And how can we change that? Or what happens if we experiment with changing it? So when you change your way of relating to time and space, your understanding of time and space, when you experiment with that, you're also experimenting with your understanding of who you are, of what it means to be a self, not like who Jack is or your particular identity. But we all have this sense of what it means to be someone, to be a me. In his later books, Rinpoche, not TSK books, Rinpoche often talks about how we're kind of caught up in a commitment to I and me and mine and mind, he says. So it's like that, we have a way of going around in the world just committed to our sense of self. And that's absolutely connected to how we understand time and space. If time and space are different, the role of the self is different. The place that we kind of reserve for ourselves, kind of like, I live here, this is me. Or Rinpoche says in one of the early TSK books, or one of the TSK books of the six, he says, we have this story we tell. It's the founding story. And that founding story is, here I am. And when you tell that story, then time has to be a certain way and space has to be a certain way, or the here I am story doesn't work. So if you reverse that and you say, if space is different and time is different, then you loosen up the self. You're not attacking the self. And it's not as though the self, it's not that there's no self. But when we say that the self exists in a certain way, and this is sounding a little Buddhist now, but it works in TSK too, when we say that the self does not exist, we're not saying that there's no self. We're just saying that it doesn't exist in the way we think it exists, or that in general things don't exist in the way that we think they exist. So on one level, TSK is a kind of inquiry into what it means for something to exist. So that's TSK. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of that. And this is maybe, I'm going to talk mostly about time today, not so much space. And if we have time, maybe at the end. I read once that time is the most frequently used noun in the English language. Interesting. I'm not sure what the significance is, but it struck me as interesting. So we're mostly going to talk about time. If we have time at the end, I will say a little bit about space, but we're covering a lot of ground already. So we'll see where that leads to. But what I'm going to do right now is give you a very, very short experiment that is more maybe of a space experiment than a time experiment, but it's just something I thought of today or maybe yesterday. I'm not, these are experiments, right? So I'm going to ask you to share in this experiment. It's very simple. So put your hands up facing, the fingers facing each other, like this. Okay. And now lift the index finger up, just like that. And now back down. So that's the movement. Now do it again, but this time really try to feel your way into the movement. What is happening? And not just in the fingers. So just keep doing this. Do it at your own pace. Not just in the fingers, but like, what is the effect on your whole sense of being here? Does it make a difference to be really tuned in to what's happening? So being here, meaning like in your whole body, but also in your sense of being in this room. Maybe even in your sense of being a person, being the person you are. Does making this little movement have any impact on that? Okay, you can stop. Maybe I'll ask at the end. Oh, does anybody find that interesting? Nah. Okay. I thought it was interesting yesterday, so I thought I'd try it today. But okay.
It starts you thinking.
It starts you thinking? Okay, well, that's interesting.
It was interesting because you just feel that you may not have control over it,
Right.
and it's just happening.
It's just happening. Oh, that's nice when that happens. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's already something about the self, and like, what's the role of the self? Does it have to be the one doing that? Okay. As I said, I mostly want to talk about time today. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because it's a good way to make the contrast between full presence mindfulness and ordinary mindfulness. I'm not putting down ordinary mindfulness. It's just different, right? So when I use the word ordinary, it's not like, oh, it's just ordinary. Regular mindfulness, conventional mindfulness, other kinds of mindfulness, however you want to think about it. Mostly mindfulness talks about being present, right? Being aware in the moment of what's happening in this moment. And that's useful. And it's especially useful in comparison to what is so often going on in our experience, which is thinking. When we are busy thinking, we're often not present, right? We're kind of lost in thought world. And so being aware of what's going on in the present, without judging anything, I'm kind of giving you a standard definition of mindfulness now. Being aware of what's going on in the present without judgment is a way to settle into your experience and not get carried away by thinking. So that's good. And in full presence mindfulness, we do some practice like that too, because it's very good to center in your immediate experience. But since we're interested in time, one of the things about our experience is that we are not just caught in the present moment. We are living our lives in past, present, and future simultaneously. Past and future are really a part of the present. And that's a fundamental theme that starts to loosen up our usual understanding of time. Now, I don't know if that sounds convincing to you. Let me just give you a very small example. Suppose you decide that you're going to go to the store. And so you're walking down the street to go to the store, the grocery store, whatever it is. And you could focus on what's going on in the moment. You could focus on what you're seeing, the sounds you're hearing, the movements of the body, which is great. Those are all good things to focus on. But it's also true that there is a past that has led you to walk out the door and head toward the store, right? There is, maybe it's a sense of, oh, I need to get some things, maybe there's that story or you've realized that you're missing some things, right? And there's a decision that you've made. You could think of that as being the past, right? And there's also a future because, you're heading to the store. Maybe you're thinking about what you're going to get at the store, but I'm not so much concerned with the thoughts right now. It's that you have a sense of going somewhere, of heading somewhere. So there's a past, a present, and a future. You put all those things together and what you have is a story. And stories we tend to think of as narratives, and so very much like this happened, and this happened, and this happened. That's our usual understanding of time. But I'm talking about story in a somewhat different way. The story of your experience is a story that you're living right now. So right now, I mean, going to the store was just sort of an experiment so that you could imagine it. But right now, you're living a story, right? You're here in this room. You came here for some reason. I have no idea. You have some intention in being here and maybe some intention of what's going to happen next. All of those things are a part of your lived experience. They're part of the story that you're inhabiting. And since that's the case, it makes sense to say that time is about that three-dimensional past, present, future structure. And although it's fine to keep thinking of it in terms of past and present and future, it's also true that they're all present right now. Right. We're always inhabiting past and present and future simultaneously. Sometimes one may be more important than another. If we're focused on body experience, for instance, then the present is pretty much central. But it may well be that what's going on in what's live for you, what you're caring about, is the past, your sense of what brought you here, what's going on right now, or it might be your intention, what's going to happen next. And it might be partly a question of what you're thinking about, but it's also a question of what's alive for you right now. So I walked over here. I live in this community setting, part of the Nyingma community, which is about a mile from here, I guess. And I walked over. And so, what was going on for me? Well, part of the time, it was seeing what I see, thinking about the buildings, as I walk past the Cal campus, noticing people and cars and all that stuff. But really, probably, it's probably more accurate, or it's accurate to say that a lot of the time, what was foremost in my mind was that I was heading to give this talk. This is where I was headed. So the future was very much active in the realm that I was inhabiting, the story that I was living. So we like to tell stories, but I really want to focus, or I really want to suggest that something that's more important to think about the stories that we're living, that we're inhabiting. And a lot of the times, the stories that we live, that we inhabit, are habitual. We don't even notice what we're doing. I mean, the classic example is brushing your teeth. You don't think about brushing your teeth unless you've decided to make that a practice. Probably, maybe you do. I actually think I think more about brushing my teeth now than I used to. But after 40 years, I have to have something to show for this practice, right? But no, you're not so focused on that because it's just routine. There are many, many, many things we do all the time throughout the course of the day that are kind of routine. They're stories, but we have turned them into just the way things are, to come back to that phrase. And so we don't think about them. We take them for granted. That's an expression that I like, because the words, because something has been given us, something has been granted. We take it for granted. But because we take it for granted, we also don't even notice it. So a large part of the practice in full presence mindfulness is involved with bringing stories alive and being aware of the stories that we really inhabit. Because when we do that, we're fully present. And part of doing that is that we become aware of how stories are always unfolding through time. And so when we look in that way, time becomes interesting for us. And time in the usual sense, Rinpoche talks about time in the first book. I'm thinking of early on in the book. I mean, he talks, there's hundreds of pages, or 100 pages anyway, devoted to time. So I'm not trying to summarize them. But in the beginning, he says, well, time is this force that kind of bears down on us, or we don't feel we have enough time. We run out of time. It's frustrating. And that's important. That's valuable to see that. But it's also true that we take time for granted too. We take the succession of moments from past to present to future, the tick, 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 tick. We think that's what time is. That's not what time is. That's just how you measure time. Somebody asked Einstein once, what's time? And he said, time is what you measure off the face of a clock, or what you read off the face of a clock. And that was very disappointing to me that he said that, because that's what time is if you think of time as measurement. But time as you live it is something dynamic. I mean, in a certain sense, we are time. Right? Our lives are just the unfolding of experience through time in space. And that's a way of starting to open up to the possibilities that the TSK vision offers in terms of making friends with time. I mean, maybe the starting point is to make friends with time, right? And then gradually you realize, you could say, this is not exactly how Rinpoche says it in the books, but you could say that you realize that you are time, right? So we live in time in that way, and that opens up possibilities in how we can explore time. So there are all sorts of really interesting exercises in the TSK books about exploring time. So one of the things to do, and maybe we can actually do this as a short practice, one of the things to do is just be aware of how often we are involved in the past and the future, not the present. We say, well, where am I? I'm in the present. Of course I'm in the present. Where else could I be? Because the past is gone, the future is not here yet. A little problematic, because if you look for the present, you can't really take hold of it either. Actually, there's no way to take hold of one of those three divisions of time. It's very, very hard to live in time if that's how you understand it. But our minds go here and there in time. And that's one of the interesting places to start, it seems to me, in beginning to question the nature of time, is to realize that although if we would say, well, time goes from moment to moment to moment, if you look at your experience, that's not what time is like at all. Time, you find yourself in a moment, and let's say it's the moment of listening to me right now, okay? Okay. But in the next moment, and I take no offense at this because this is how the mind works, in the next moment, you are maybe thinking about being hungry, or an ache in your shoulder, or whatever it is, right? And from a kind of outside point of view, you'd say, well, one moment you were listening to me, and the next moment you were aware of the ache in your shoulder. So that's moment, 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 moment. But in fact, when you're listening to me, that's one timing, that's one story, you could say. And when you're aware of the ache in your shoulder, that's another story. And they're separate from each other. Each one is its own time. Each one has its own past, present, and future. They come and go really quickly. We go very, very quickly from one story to another story. So maybe you don't notice that so much. But if you look, you start to see. And the starting point for doing that, I mean, that was a little more than I would expect you to be able to, or how should I say that? A little more than you would probably notice right now. That's why I just told you the story of it. But one thing you can notice right at the beginning is just how often we are moving, because those examples I gave you, listening to me, the shoulder in your pain, the pain in your shoulder, those are in the present. At least we would nominally say they're in the present. But if you look at your experience, you're actually moving all the time. You're remembering something, you're thinking about something in the future. Those are kind of the two options. Or you're imagining something that doesn't exist at all, kind of a fantasy time. So you could say there are kind of four possibilities for time. Maybe a few more, but that's enough. So one of the things to do, and let's just do this for a minute. We're not normally if you do an experiment of the kind that I've been trying to describe, they're not like big, long experiments. In the first TSK book, Rinpoche sometimes says, do this practice 45 minutes. Sometimes he says, do it 45 minutes 4 times a day. He really wants you to, in that first book especially, I think he was hoping that people could really take this inquiry into a new vision of reality, take it on in a very serious way. In the later books, he doesn't do that so much because it's very hard. And of course, as we all know, it's getting harder and harder to really stay focused on anything at all in our culture, in our time, right? But when we do experiments in TSK, typically they're for like 5 minutes, something like that. We're going to do an experiment for like a minute and the experiment is just being aware of when are you in the past, when are you in the present, when are you in the future? And when I say you are in, that's not necessarily the most accurate way to say it, but for our purposes right now, it's okay. Past awareness, let's say, future awareness, present awareness. Just take a look for a minute now. Okay. Anything interesting? We'll open up a minute of comments if anybody has any kind of short comments. Was that interesting? Did you find something there that you weren't aware of before? A little bit. I see people nodding. Maybe nobody wants to speak. We'll give people a chance to say something.
Well, I just want to say something about the instant.
Sure, Michael.
It's Bob. But anyway,
Oh, Bob, sorry.
no worries.
Thought I heard the voice right. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Well, there isn't much to say except the instant when the past is becoming the present and the present's becoming the future is really interesting space or
It is.
time.
Okay.
Really interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And especially that movement that is happening all the time into the future, that's really, really important. Really, really, I don't mean it's important in the sense of we've got to focus on it, but that's where you can really sense the aliveness of time. Something is happening all the time. It's an interesting phrase. Okay, something is happening. Okay. Well, I want to move with that. I want to do something else with that practice for just a moment, because you remember I was saying that we really are always involved in a story, and the story, not exactly the story of our lives, because that makes it sound like a narrative. It's more that there's this kind of dynamic that is it always involves the past and the future. And if you want to think of it as the story of your lives, that's okay too. So the practice is, again, just be aware of It's a little different from what we were doing. Be aware of being in the room right now. And bring into that awareness your sense of everything that has led up to this moment. Like, don't think about what's led up to this moment. Just let it be present. You don't have to be telling stories. It's just the fullness of who you are has kind of come to a point right now. And let all that be there. Okay. Okay, so maybe not so much in the way of experience there. Maybe, you have your way of experiencing, right? You walked in here and now we have this hour together and you'll walk out, you'll still be kind of doing it the same way. What does it mean to experience something? However you were doing it an hour ago is still kind of going to be the way you're going to be doing it an hour from now. But maybe something just a little bit like the possibility opens up that it could be different. Right? That even experience is not something we can take for granted or need to take for granted. The whole idea of experience, I personally think the word is very helpful. I think that the real question for us to engage, and in terms of understanding time and space also, is how do we experience time and space? Not like what are our understandings of time and space, but can we experience them differently? Can we experience our sense of self differently? But Rinpoche doesn't actually like the word experience because he feels that it automatically implies a self who's having experiences. And if it did mean that, if it does mean that, and I suppose in ordinary usage it does mean that, then yeah, it would be a little problematic. But the way that I like to think about experience is that there doesn't have to be a self who's having the experience. There doesn't have to be a to refer to a practice that we like to do in full presence mindfulness. When you're breathing, there doesn't have to be a you that's breathing. There can just be breathing. And that's something you could try for a breath right now. The breathing happens by itself. Right? And then we can control it a little bit if we want to, if we choose to. But breathing happens by itself. Luckily, because if we had to think about breathing, if we had to always be the one who was breathing, we couldn't do much of anything else. So breathing happens by itself, and in the same way, experience happens by itself. And part of the experience is that there's a story going on, and part of that story, normally, ordinarily, conventionally, is that there is a self at the center of our experience. There's a self who's experiencing. There's a self who owns the experience. And that's a story. It's not wrong. It's a useful story. Very difficult and probably unnecessary to come up with a different story. Because, the self is the one who's listening, we say. The self is the one who's sitting on a chair or sitting on a cushion. The self is the one who's going to leave the room and go have whatever snacks they've put out there for us. That's a fine story. The problem is we don't think of it as a story. We think of it as the way things are, that there is a self and it's at the center of experience, and that everything that happens matters because it happens to us. Right? And that's putting way too much weight on the self. That's turning it into a kind of an object, special object, because it doesn't exist in the world the way that other objects exist in the world, but it's turning it into an object just like a black box. When you think of it that way, you shut it down. You're never going to be able to open it up again. So don't think of it that way. And the way not to think about it that way, one way to investigate that is to start seeing how time works, how we're constantly moving through time in a way that time and that past and present and future are not connected to each other, but are kind of complete in themselves, and now they're complete in themselves again, but it's not the same complete in themselves. It's not, one past and future and present is not the same as the past and future and present that we just were going through. Then you have to figure out how to connect those two. Those are little complications we don't have to think about right now. Okay, so I do want to say a little bit about space, because we've already kind of touched on it. And of course, space and time and knowledge are related. Rinpoche presents them as facets of being. So it's not as though we say, oh, now we're just talking about space. When you're involved with space, or let's say time, you're not going to leave out an appreciation for the other one, for the other ones. It's all sort of happening at the same time. See, we can't help but use these words. So the thing about space that I'll emphasize right now is that space is not what we think it is. So I said that about time, right? The time is not this tick, 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 tick. It's the dynamic of our lives unfolding in a story that we inhabit, or you could say embody, but I think inhabit is better. Space is not what we think of. We think of space as being this physical something. It's very strange, because physical space, like here we are in this room, and there's space in the room, and that space is everywhere, right? Space is everywhere, right? The whole idea that we inhabit a particular place in space is a little bit misleading, because really when we say that, we're talking about place. We inhabit a particular place in space, right? We're all in this room here. That's the place we occupy. But space, there are no distinctions in space. Space doesn't care. The space outside is not different from, is inseparable from the space inside this room. But that's physical space. You don't have to agree with that. I'm just sort of laying it out there right now, but that's something to think about. But even that is not getting at what space is really all about, because if you think in terms of experience, not in terms of objects, See, the thing about space, the way we normally think about it is physical, even though it has no substance. But it has to be physical, because otherwise physical things couldn't show up in it, right? If space was not in some sense physical, objects that exist in space couldn't exist in space. So space is physical in that sense, but that's one kind of space. It's just one possibility. In terms of our experience, what's much more important is that space, just as physical space allows objects, space allows experience. That's a very different understanding of space, but it's not completely different, because we think about, or we talk about, or we experience space, in experiential ways. We say, I need more space, right? Or we talk about mental space. We talk about the space of thinking. We talk about emotional space. We talk about all those things, and I mean, words don't matter so much, but why do we talk about them? Because there's a sense in which we already do appreciate that space is not just physical. That space is what allows whatever appears. Space is that allowingness. You know, time is the dynamic quality of everything that appears. Space is the allowingness, the capacity to allow whatever appears. And what appears is not just stuff, you know. I always think it's helpful to think about dreams, because in a dream, everything that shows up, all the characters, all the locations, all the events, of course, they're all made of the same stuff, right? They're all made of dream stuff. And that includes the space in the dream, but it includes everything else too. And it's helpful to me. It's a useful analogy to think about what is going on in our own experience. Everything that we experience, you could say, is made up of experience stuff, or you could say, is made up of space stuff, in the same sense that you know, objects have to be made, in some sense, have to be made of space stuff, or they couldn't appear in space. Experience has to be made of experience stuff, or it couldn't appear, and it couldn't appear in the space of experience. So the way to think about space is that it's not physical at all. That's one particular kind of space. Space is the potential for anything at all to appear. And because our language is what it is, we say anything, and thing makes us think about substances. But it's not about substances. Our experience is not about substance. We are not about substances. We're about experience. We're about what's alive and meaningful for us. And so space also allows meaning. So that takes us right back into stories. Stories unfold in time, and they find their meaning in space. So when you start to see space and time in that way, and that's very much, you could say, at the heart of full presence mindfulness, it leads you back into a very different understanding of what space and time are about. And therefore, as I said at the beginning, a very different understanding of what it means to be a me, to be an I. All that changes in a very fundamental way. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and leave a few minutes for questions. I know I covered a lot of ground. So a few minutes for questions, and then I want to make a short announcement, and I know Kaz wants, where's Kaz? Kaz wanted to make a short announcement too. Maybe somebody else did. She'll come in. Kaz will appear and make her announcement. Okay, questions? Yes.
Thing I was thinking about was just the way there's some things in the past that are a little that we can hold on to a little more, you know, as like walking up the steps, for example. I walked up the steps to come here versus the future when I imagine things that very well might not take place.
Right.
And I guess that was just coming up for me, and I just wonder how you think about that, because those are all stories, but
Right.
in this exercise.
Yeah, so the future that we think about, like, you know, what are you going to do tomorrow morning? You know, I mean, you probably have a pretty good idea because it's a routine, right? And so you know what you're going to do, but you don't, that future doesn't really exist, and it's never going to exist, right? By the time it shows up, it's going to be the present. You know? So the future is very much something that we make up, and that's not the kind of future that is interesting. The future that is interesting goes back a little bit to the question that Bob asked, and what I said about the future arising. You know, the future that's happening right now. Like, I mean, not right now, but there. You know, kind of off to one side. No, that's not a good way to describe it. That's the aliveness. You know, comes with the future. The fact that we make up stories about the future, and we feel kind of confident that we can predict it, those stories I don't think are as interesting. And the stories we make up about the past, a lot of them are not as interesting either. That's why we did that little exercise for a minute, where I asked you to really bring the present into rather bring the past into the present. And you could do that with the future too. I mean, the future that we care about, the future that matters to us, we can bring that into our lives. That can be a part of the experience that we inhabit. Probably more than what you wanted to hear, but maybe that's helps. Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like, what we're dealing with here is just, our concepts of past, present, and future are really what we're feeling at the moment. Our feelings really, kind of like govern our interpretations of a past, a present, or a future. And I guess maybe the goal of this practice is just to get us to be aware of this process of feeling,
Well, that's a part of it.
things happening.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but sure. I think that the word feeling is too limited. A word that I use sometimes is feel instead of feeling. And what I mean by that distinction is whatever is going on right now, there's in your experience, there's a feel to it. Right? It doesn't have to be a feeling. It might be something you can't put words to. And of course, our feelings we often can't put words to either. But I like that broader term. So yes, we want to be able to tune in to the aliveness of our experience, or you could say the feel. And it's surprisingly difficult to do that because we're very committed to explaining, describing, narrating, excusing, justifying. We spend so much of our lives not really engaged with the feel of what's happening, and instead engaged with what we have to say about the feel of what's happening. We're kind of some people think in thought in words, some people think in images, but there are many different ways, I suppose. And I'm not saying specifically in words necessarily, but there's experience and then the way we make sense of experience. And we tend to focus in on the way we make sense of experience instead of experience. And in fact, we can't tell the difference. You may feel like you can, maybe you can. But I would say that mostly we can't tell the difference. We get lost. It's a little bit like the metaphor that's quite commonly used about the mistaking the menu for the meal, right? Or the map for the territory. We live our lives crawling in and out of the map, or sort of the letters of the menu, and we say, "Oh, what a nice meal." Because we don't realize that that's what we're doing. We're trying to live our lives. To use an image I was writing about recently, we live our lives 2 seconds in the past and 2 inches off the ground. We're not here. So it's about being fully present, but it turns out that that's also embodies the past and the future. Okay. Ooh, that was 7 o'clock. One more question? Yes, up there. With the fingers, yeah.
I was focused for mindfulness enough that my past, present, and the future is going round and round and round here. But it's very short. How do you keep it, or how do you practice?
How do you keep that, or how do I practice? Well, that's always a big. I don't think it's so helpful to talk about how I practice, but sure, it was short, and it may be that if you do an exercise like this, let's say you do it for 5 minutes. If you find this interesting, take 5 minutes sometime, not now. And you just do this practice. Well, in those 5 minutes, maybe there'll be a few seconds where you say, oh, that's interesting. I really feel like the past and the future are coming together in that moment. So then you stay with that. You continue to explore. The main thing really in this kind of practice and this way of questioning our usual understanding is to always be exploring. And that's a lifelong practice. I mean, one of the things I feel about full presence mindfulness, and I think is true with TSK, unless you engage it maybe very seriously, or unless, oh, I don't know, people have different experiences. Maybe you have this remarkable experience. In the early days of when I was practicing TSK, I had some pretty remarkable experiences. But nowadays, for the last 30 years or so, it's been kind of ordinary, but ordinary in a non-ordinary way. How can I describe that? I can't. So let that be your practice, to be ordinary in a non-ordinary way. And that'll take you pretty far, actually. Okay, so I wanted to mention something, and then I know Kaz wants to mention something too, and we are running a couple of minutes late. I apologize. Let me see if I can get this up. What I wanted to let you know, and let me see if I can share this. If I can't, it's not so important, but let me try. Yeah, what I wanted to mention, and I'm sharing it to the folks who are patiently listening online, and I hope I didn't miss some questions online because I kind of forgot to look. I apologize. But yeah, what I want to do is I want to share. See if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay, I'm sharing, but you're not seeing anything on screen. That's because it's not quite there. Now it will be. I hope. No? Well, then I'm not going to worry about it. Oh, there it comes. It's coming up now. This is just the home page of the Center for Creative Inquiry, which is where I teach, and I already talked about the Center for Creative Inquiry. We actually just about a month and a half ago moved into a new location in downtown Berkeley. So we actually have a physical location that's open, which is great. We haven't had that before. And if you look right here, right there, that is an announcement of the fact that on August 23rd, which is what, maybe about 7 weeks from now, 7 or 8 weeks from now, so it's a ways off, I'm going to be doing a workshop, and it's related to time, the time of our lives. So if you go to the Creative Inquiry website, which is creativeinquiry.org, if you're interested, that would be a place to register for the workshop. And we're also going to do something sometime in August. We haven't decided yet. There will just be a kind of a conversation between me and Morgan Wells, who's the director for the Center for Creative Inquiry. A conversation about what creative inquiry is and does in full presence mindfulness. Both those events will be in that center. And it'll be a nice opportunity if you like. Oh, and I guess I should mention, because you mentioned being at Ratnaling, that I'll be leading a retreat at Ratnaling in October. And in between, in September, I'll be doing some programs in Europe if anybody happens to be traveling to Europe. Or is in Europe, but it's like 3 in the morning in Europe. So I didn't expect people to be here from Europe. Okay, I think that's it. Kaz, here you are, Kaz.
Can I sit there so people online can see me?
Sure.
And you can sit here.
Oh, you want me to? Oh, I see.
Otherwise, I have to bring a whole different computer and
Oh, we don't want to do that.
take a minute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking about the people online. You were kind of seeing me in profile, which is not my best view.
I think you got your right side, your good side. Hi, everyone. I have a quick announcement. It's only going to be about 2 minutes. I tried to make it really short so that people wouldn't have to stay beyond the full hour. I just wanted to announce, I should introduce myself. My name is Kaz Verde. I've been at the Nyingma Institute for 19 years and I was 1 year at Odeon as well. And I'm a staff member here. And I just wanted to announce that we have a big event coming up called Taste and Tribute. It's a benefit dinner and auction. It's in its 22nd year and it has featured La Bernardin's Eric Repair. In fact, he's the one that started it. Proceeds fund the delivery of sacred books from our printing house in California to the Mahabodhi Stupa in India, where the Buddha became enlightened. And there the books are freely given out to the monks and nuns and anybody who registered for them, and just to Tibetan refugees in exile. And the book giveaway happens at the Monlam Chenmo, the Nyingma Monlam Chenmo in Bodh at the Mahabodhi Stupa. Tarthang Rinpoche started the Monlam Chenmo in 1989. It started with just a few attendees and now it welcomes more than 8,000 people each year. So the distribution is quite big. We've distributed over 5 million books. And we've revived libraries and preserved the Tibetan culture. So for Taste and Tribute, this year's honored guest is Zhangquan Sunim. She's pretty well known from Netflix Chef's Table. And if you haven't seen it, even if you're not going to come to the dinner, it's a really beautiful episode with her in it, speaking about Buddhism and mindful cooking. And she sees cooking as a meditative practice. And she's really well known. She's traveled all around the world since becoming famous, and she's going to be here. She was already here once, but she's going to be here to cook for that event. And that is going to be on December 6th. She's also going to give a master class on December 7th, demonstrating her cooking style. You can find out more about this on the Taste and Tribute website, which is tasteandtribute.com. You could check out Tibetan Aid Project. That is tibetanaidproject.org. Or you can just email us here and we'll send you any links or any information you could possibly desire about this, because we're holding it here. And
Out in the garden. Right?
no, it's
indoors.
December. It's gonna
Oh,
be,
yeah.
it might be raining.
Okay.
So we still haven't figured out exactly where. It's either gonna be in here or in the dining room. Those are our two
Okay.
largest spaces.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't mislead you.
It's been for the past 2 years, it's been in the garden and it's been beautiful. And before COVID, it used to be at the Four Seasons, which is of course really beautiful. So if you would like to attend, or if you could tell your friends, if you know somebody maybe that would like to attend, you can get involved by donating an auction item or volunteering at the event. That would really help with logistics, like welcoming people, bringing them to their table, you know, bringing the silent auction items to where they can pick them up, things like that.
You said December 8th?
December 6th, yeah. So there's handouts over there with all the information I just said. It's very brief, but if you want to get involved, feel free to call us. Oh, and I wanted to say the 60 seats, we've already sold, I think 10, maybe a couple more than 10. So it's starting, if you're interested, you should get busy and and you know, take action and get your tickets for sure. And that's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you guys.
And
Thank you,
I think
everybody.
there are refreshments out in the dining room.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
there's tea and crackers and cheese and some fruit. It's really nice.
And I mentioned it mostly because I will go out there. If people have more questions, I'm happy to talk with people.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
Commandeered your computer.
Not a problem.